The sun had barely crested the tree line when the radio crackled to life. A routine morning game drive in the South African Lowveld. Dry season. The kind of stillness that sits heavy on the air, thick with dust, and the faint smell of dried grass, and something else. Something animal. Something close. His name was Marco Ferreira, 31 years old, 11 years guiding in the bush. He had tracked lions through flooded drainage lines, stood 40 meters from a charging elephant bull, once even talked a panicked tourist off a termite mound after a puff adder crossed their path. He knew the bush the way some people know their own faces, instinctively, without having to think. He thought he knew what danger looked like out here. He was wrong. Before we get into what happened to Marco that morning, if this kind of story is what you live for, if the raw, unfiltered reality of survival in the wild is what gets your blood moving, then make sure you subscribe right now. Because this is the kind of story we tell here, and there are many more where this one came from. Now, back to the bush. Marco had left camp at 5:45, well before sunrise. His group that morning was small. A couple from Munich, a solo traveler from Japan, and a retired school teacher from Edinburgh who had been saving up for this trip for 11 years. He had given them the same briefing he gave every group. Stay in the vehicle unless I say so. Do not stand up suddenly. Do not make sudden loud noises. And if I tell you to get back in, you get back in immediately. No questions. No photographs. Back in. They had seen impala within the first 3 minutes, a herd of zebra shortly after. The school teacher from Edinburgh had cried softly when a giraffe moved through the fever trees at first light, its body swaying in that slow, impossible, graceful way that giraffes move, as if time behaves differently around them. It had been a beautiful morning, gentle, generous with its wildlife. And then Marco heard them. African wild dogs are not subtle. They communicate constantly, with high-pitched whines, yips, and a peculiar twittering call that sounds almost cheerful, almost musical, and is therefore deeply disorienting when you hear it rising from the long grass 40 meters away. Marco had heard it before. He loved wild dogs. He had told his guests about them earlier that morning, in the way that people talk about something they genuinely admire. He had said that wild dogs have the highest hunt success rate of any large predator on the African continent. Around 80% of their hunts end in a kill. Lions manage roughly 30, leopards a little higher, but wild dogs are extraordinary hunters, strategic, relentless, and built for endurance. They do not ambush, they chase. They run their prey into the ground over long distances, taking turns to lead the pursuit, the pack rotating so that fresh legs are always at the front. Their prey does not escape through speed. It escapes only if it is lucky. Marco stopped the vehicle, killed the engine. He told his guests quietly, "Do not move. We are going to watch something." The dogs came through the long grass in a loose formation. 14 of them, painted like abstract art, their coats a wild pattern of black and brown and white and gold, each one unique, each one reading differently in the early morning light. Their large, rounded ears turned like satellite dishes as they moved, picking up frequencies of sound that nothing else in the bush could detect. They were beautiful in the way that absolute efficiency is beautiful, designed without a single wasted feature. They paused at the edge of the clearing. The lead dog, a large female with a torn left ear, scanned the tree line, then the drainage ditch. Then the vehicle. Her eyes stopped there for a moment. Wild dogs have excellent vision. She processed the vehicle the way all wild things process unfamiliar objects, as a possible threat or a possible irrelevance. She decided, after a moment, on irrelevance. The pack moved on. Marco tracked them slowly with the vehicle. He kept his distance. The dogs were heading toward a cluster of termite mounds at the far end of the clearing. Enormous structures, some of them 2 meters high, built over decades by millions of insects, hard as concrete, sharp-edged and complex in shape. Beyond the mounds was a dry riverbed choked with undergrowth. Good hunting ground, enclosed and disorienting for prey. The female with the torn ear paused again. She was reading something in the air that Marco could not read. Then suddenly the entire pack broke into a run, not the measured, pacing trot of a hunt in progress, but an explosive burst of speed, all 14 dogs accelerating at once in different directions. Something had spooked them, and then the vehicle stalled. It was a mechanical failure. Simple, sudden, and catastrophic in its timing. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times, would not catch. Marco kept his voice completely level. He told his guests to stay seated. He tried again. Nothing. The pack had scattered. Some of the dogs had looped around to the right, behind the vehicle. Others had gone left, toward the mounds. In the confusion, Marco made a decision that guides are trained to avoid making. He stepped out of the vehicle. It was not a reckless decision, not in the context of his training and experience. Wild dogs do not target humans. They are not listed among the animals most dangerous to people. They are wary of humans, generally, cautious and avoidant. Marco knew this. He had factored it in. He stepped out to assess the vehicle from the driver's side, to check whether a tire had punctured, whether something had fouled the engine from underneath. He was experienced enough to know what the vehicle sounded like when it stalled versus when it had a mechanical failure. This had sounded different. He needed 30 seconds to look. He never got them. The pack had not scattered in fear. They had scattered because they were hunting. And what they were hunting had just run directly toward the vehicle. A young impala, barely a year old, had burst from the long grass at full speed and veered when it saw the vehicle, cutting hard to the right and circling back around the far side of the termite mounds. The pack followed it. 14 dogs, moving at 60 kilometers an hour in an arc that swept around both sides of the clearing simultaneously, converging on the mounds from every direction. Marco was standing between the vehicle and the nearest mound. He understood what was happening in less than a second. Not because he panicked, because he was good at his job. He saw the first 2 dogs come around the left edge of the mound. He heard the others behind him, the sound of their feet on dry earth, the tight, urgent yipping of a pack in full pursuit. He looked back at the vehicle. The tourists were frozen. The passenger door was 4 steps away. He did not make it 4 steps. The impala hit the gap between Marco and the vehicle at full speed, and then veered again when it saw him, cutting directly into him, shoulder checking him off his feet. He went down hard. One knee, both hands, face close to the ground. When he came back up, he was on the wrong side. The dogs were everywhere, not attacking him, not at all. They did not even register him as a threat or a target. They had their prey, but the pursuit had folded in on itself around the termite mound, and Marco was inside the fold. He scrambled to his feet. His back was against the mound. The mound was roughly 2 meters wide and 3 meters tall at its highest point. The surface was like sandpaper against his shirt. He pressed back into it instinctively, the way any animal presses against a solid surface when surrounded. There were dogs to his left and dogs to his right, and the impala was somewhere in front of him, still moving, still screaming, that high, thin sound that prey animals make at the end of a chase. The dogs were closing. Marco counted. Later, when he was asked to describe the next 90 seconds, he would say that he counted. He did not know why. It was not a strategy he had been taught. It was not something he had planned. He just started counting in his head, 1 number per second, because it kept his mind from spiraling and his breathing from going ragged, and because in the bush, if you lose your breathing, you lose everything. 1, 2, 3. The impala went down 12 meters to his left. Fast, professional. The pack descended on it with extraordinary efficiency. No ceremony, no hesitation. This is what wild dogs do. They kill cleanly and they eat quickly, because in the African bush, what you have today can be taken by a hyena tomorrow. Speed is survival at the carcass just as much as in the chase. 4, 5, 6. 3 dogs had not joined the kill. They had stopped. They were looking at Marco, not with aggression, with curiosity. This is, in many ways, more unsettling than aggression. Aggression you can read. Aggression has a shape to it, a posture, a set of signals that tell you where it is going. Curiosity has no shape. Curiosity can become anything. 7, 8, 9. Marco knew the rules. He had been teaching them for 11 years. Do not run. Running activates the chase response in any predator. Do not crouch. Crouching makes you look small and vulnerable. Stand tall. Make yourself as large as possible. Do not make sudden movements. Make slow, deliberate ones. Do not break eye contact, unless you know breaking eye contact signals submission to that specific species. And in some species it does. And in some species it does not. And in wild dogs no one is entirely sure, because wild dogs are wild dogs and they write their own rules. 10, 11, 12. The dog on the left took a step toward him. It was a young male, lighter than the others, with a particularly vivid patch of gold above his left eye. He was not growling. His tail was low but not tucked. His ears were forward. He was genuinely curious. He had probably never been this close to a human being standing on the ground. The concept of a human on the ground, not in a vehicle, not elevated and sealed and smelling of metal and rubber and engine oil, was new information. He was processing it. 13, 14, 15. The sound of eating from 12 meters away is loud, specific, unforgettable. If you have heard a pack of wild dogs eating, you will know what this sounds like and you will not easily forget it. Marco had heard it before, from the vehicle, from a safe distance. Hearing it from here, in this context, with his back against a termite mound, was a different experience entirely. 16, 17, 18. He moved his right hand, slowly, very slowly. He needed to reach the radio on his hip. It was clipped there, as always, in the same position it occupied every morning, a solid rectangle of metal and plastic that was, at this precise moment, the most important object in the world. If he could reach it, he could tell the camp where he was. If he could tell the camp where he was, they could send another vehicle. If they sent another vehicle, he had a way out. The young male watched his hand move, his head tilted, almost comically, the way dogs everywhere tilt their heads when they encounter something they cannot immediately categorize. 19, 20, 21. Marco got his fingers on the radio. He did not unclip it yet. He just touched it. A small victory, a thing to hold on to. 22, 23, 24. One of the other two observing dogs lost interest and turned back toward the kill. That left two, the young male with the gold patch, and a female, older, calmer, who had been standing very still this entire time with her eyes on Marco in a way that felt almost evaluative, as if she were running some internal calculation. He is large. He is not prey-shaped. He is not moving the way prey moves. He is something else. What is he? 25, 26, 27. Marco unclipped the radio. The click of the clip was not loud. In any other context, it would have been inaudible. But in the concentrated silence of those 90 seconds, surrounded by the sounds of the pack feeding and the whisper of wind in the dry grass and his own carefully controlled breathing, the click was a small explosion. The young male startled, took 2 rapid steps toward Marco, stopped. His hackles came up, not fully, partially. The fur along his spine rising in a ridge, an automatic response, a reflex that the dog himself was probably not even consciously directing. 28, 29, 30. Marco pressed the button on the radio and spoke quietly and clearly. His voice did not shake. He was proud of that afterward, that his voice did not shake. He said his name. He said the general area. He said he was on foot, back to the western Termite Mound cluster at the southern end of Sector 4, with a pack of dogs that had made a kill nearby, and he said he needed another vehicle at this location as soon as possible. He released the button, static. Then the voice of his colleague, Lasidi, clipped, immediate, already moving. 31, 32, 33. The young male had backed up 2 steps when Marco spoke. Dogs, all dogs, wild or domestic, read voice differently from the way humans do. It is not the words, it is the frequency, the rhythm, the emotional texture underneath. Marco's voice had been low and steady, and without the high edges of fear. The male processed this, backed up, watched. 34, 35, 36. Now Marco could afford to think about the vehicle. It was roughly 8 meters to his right, slightly behind him. The tourists were still inside. He could not see their faces from this angle. He hoped they were doing what he had asked them to do. He hoped nobody was leaning out with a phone. He hoped the school teacher from Edinburgh had not decided this was the moment to open the door. 37, 38, 39. The older female made a decision. She turned, walked back toward the kill. Her tail was up slightly now. Whatever calculations she had been running about Marco, she had reached a conclusion. He was not interesting enough. He was not prey. He was a strange, large, upright thing pressed against a termite mound, and he was not doing anything worth paying attention to. She had food 12 meters away. She went to it. 40, 41, 42. Now only the young male remained, and the young male was still curious. But curiosity has a half-life, and Marco was counting on that. He held completely still. Completely. He controlled his breathing so carefully that his chest barely moved. He was, in those moments, practicing a kind of stillness that most human beings never have occasion to practice, the kind of stillness that is not the absence of movement, but the active suppression of every instinct that is screaming at you to move. 43, 44, 45. Wild dogs are diurnal hunters. They hunt in the early morning and in the late afternoon, timed around the brutal heat of the African midday. They had been hunting since before dawn. They had run this impala, Marco estimated, for at least 3 kilometers before it reached the clearing. They were tired and they were hungry and they had a kill and they needed to eat it before the hyenas arrived. The young male's curiosity was in direct competition with his hunger. His belly was winning. 46, 47, 48. He looked at Marco one more time. That tilted head, those extraordinary ears, rotating slightly, reading the air. Then he turned and trotted to the kill, tail rising as he went, the slow wag of an animal returning to something pleasant. 49, 50, 51. Marco did not move. This is the critical error that people make in these situations. The danger passes, and they exhale, and they drop their shoulders, and they take a step. And sometimes that movement, that sudden exhalation of tension, is what re-triggers the attention of an animal that had just finished deciding you were not worth attending to. Marco had been teaching this principle for 11 years. He now experienced why it is true. He stayed still. He breathed. He counted. 52, 53, 54. The pack fed. The African sun was climbing. The shadows of the termite mounds shortened around him. A Cape glossy starling landed on the top of the mound above his head, looked down at him with one bright eye, and flew away. Somewhere in the distance, a gray go-away bird called its name. Go away, go away. Marco thought distantly that this was good advice, and that he intended to follow it as soon as he was able. 55, 56, 57. He heard the vehicle before he saw it. Lassetti, moving fast on the track that ran along the southern perimeter of Sector 4. The engine a steady growl that grew louder, and then the white of the vehicle appearing through the scrub, and then Lassetti himself, at the wheel. His face reading the scene immediately. The pack, the kill, Marco at the mound, and Lassetti brought the vehicle to a slow stop 10 meters away, positioning it between Marco and the densest concentration of dogs, and he did this without being asked, because Lassetti had been guiding for 19 years and understood exactly what was needed. 58, 59, 60. Marco walked to the vehicle. Not quickly, not slowly. He walked the way he always walked, with the careful, deliberate pace of a man who respects his environment. He did not turn his back on the dogs. He moved in a sideways arc, keeping them in his peripheral vision. He reached the vehicle. He put one hand on the frame and stepped up. He sat down. 61, 62, 63. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. This was the only concession he made to the adrenaline that was now roaring through his system like a flood. 3 seconds. Eyes closed. Then he opened them. He looked at Lassetti. Lassetti looked at him. Nothing was said. A great deal was communicated. Then Marco turned to the vehicle behind him, where his tourists were staring at him with expressions that ranged from white-faced terror to something approaching awe. The couple from Munich were holding each other's hands. The solo traveler from Japan had his camera in his lap and had apparently, at some point, managed to take photographs, which Marco would later describe as impressively composed given the circumstances. The school teacher from Edinburgh had tears running down her face again. Different tears this time. Marco said, quietly and professionally, "Well, now you've seen wild dogs on a kill." He paused. Up close. And then, because he was Marco Ferreira, and he had been doing this for 11 years, and he understood that the best thing you can do for people who have just experienced something terrifying is to make them feel held by someone who was never afraid, he told them about wild dogs, properly, the way he loved to tell it. He told them that Lycaon pictus, the African painted wolf, is one of the most endangered carnivores in the world. Fewer than 6,500 remain in the wild. They once ranged across most of sub-Saharan Africa. They are now confined to fragmented populations across eastern and southern Africa, their territories shrinking as human settlements expand, their numbers depleted by snares set for other animals, by disease contracted from domestic dogs, by persecution from farmers who, not unreasonably, fear for their livestock. And yet they survive, because they are extraordinary, because they have developed social structures of almost startling sophistication, because they share food in ways that few other carnivores do, regurgitating meat for pack members that could not participate in the hunt, because they care for their injured and their sick, because they are loyal to each other with an intensity that feels, when you watch it, almost remarkable. He told them that the pack's alpha pair are typically the only pair that breeds. The rest of the pack are helpers. Aunts and uncles and older siblings who assist in raising pups, who babysit, who bring food, who guard the den. The pack is the unit of survival. The individual alone is vulnerable. Together they are formidable. He told them that the hunt they had just watched, that precise, coordinated, breathtaking pursuit, was not instinct alone. It was learned, practiced, refined over years within the social structure of the pack. Young dogs learn by watching older dogs. They develop specializations. Some are faster, some are better at cutting off escape routes. Some excel at the final moments of a chase. The pack thinks collectively in a way that individual intelligence alone cannot replicate. He told them all of this, and as he talked, the dogs finished their meal and lifted their heads, and one by one began to move away, trotting in that loose, easy way of theirs, back toward the long grass, back toward wherever they would rest through the heat of the day. The female with the torn ear went last. She paused at the edge of the grass and turned and looked at the two vehicles for a moment, processing, evaluating. Then she was gone. Sector 4 was quiet. The termite mound stood as it had stood for decades, enormous and patient and indifferent. A red-billed oxpecker called somewhere to the north. The sky was deepening toward the savage blue of a high-veld morning. Marco tried the engine again. It started first time. Of course it did. African wild dogs are ghosts. This is what experienced guides say about them. You can spend weeks in prime wild dog territory and never see them. They cover enormous distances, their territories sometimes exceeding 900 square kilometers, and they move through that space like water through a landscape. Always moving, always hunting, always together. Then one morning the grass parts, and there they are, painted and bright-eyed and utterly themselves, and then they are gone again, and the bush closes over the space where they stood, and you are left wondering whether you really saw them at all. Marco had his first wild dog sighting at the age of 19. He was a trainee guide, not yet qualified, riding as a passenger on a drive when a pack of 9 crossed the road in front of the vehicle. He remembered how the driver had stopped and turned off the engine, and how everyone had gone completely quiet, the way people go quiet in the presence of something that asks for it. He had counted the dogs as they crossed. One by one, he had reached 9, and then the grass had closed and they were gone, and he had thought, with the absolute certainty of 19-year-old conviction, that he would spend his life in places where that kind of thing happened. He had been right. But wild dogs are also a lesson in how quickly the calculus of the bush can change, how a morning that is beautiful and generous can pivot on a mechanical failure, on the coincidence of timing, on an impala running in one direction rather than another. The bush does not care about your 11 years of experience. It does not make exceptions for your expertise. It simply is what it is, and it asks you to pay attention, always, completely, without the slack that familiarity can produce. Marco had gotten slack. He would say this himself, later, to other guides, in the careful post-incident analysis that is part of how experienced people process these things. He had stepped out of the vehicle without adequately accounting for the dynamics of an active hunt. He had known the dogs were there. He had known a hunt might be in progress. He had seen the pack split and scatter, which is a pursuit behavior, not a fear behavior, and he had stepped out anyway because he needed to check the vehicle. The assessment of risk he had made in that moment had been incomplete. He did not say this to punish himself. He said it because the only thing that distinguishes an experienced person from an inexperienced one, ultimately, is the willingness to analyze what went wrong and to update. To be, always, a student. Of the bush, of the animals in it, of yourself. 90 seconds. He had counted 90 seconds against that termite mound. He had later tried to verify this by counting aloud, walking the same 8 meters from mound to vehicle, and his 90-second count had him arriving at the vehicle with time to spare. So the actual elapsed time may have been less. It may have been 70 seconds, it may have been 60. Time does strange things in extreme circumstances. It compresses and expands in ways that have nothing to do with clocks. What he knew for certain was that it had felt like a very long time, and that he had spent every second of it thinking clearly, which is, in the end, the only real survival tool any human being carries into the bush. The brain that does not panic, the breath that does not run away, the voice that stays level, the legs that do not run when every instinct is screaming at them to do exactly that. African wild dogs do not hunt humans. This bears repeating because fear has a way of distorting things, of taking an experience that was frightening and reshaping it in the memory into something more monstrous than it was. The dogs had not targeted Marco. They had not threatened him. The young male's curiosity had been exactly that. Curiosity, not aggression. In the spectrum of dangerous wildlife encounters, this one, assessed objectively, was not at the highest end. The dogs were occupied with a kill. They were tired and fed. The probability of attack had been low, but probability is not certainty, and in the bush, the distance between low probability and zero probability is exactly where people get hurt. It is the distance Marco had been standing in for 90 seconds, with his back against a termite mound that had stood longer than he had been alive, counting quietly in his head while the painted wolves of Africa ate their breakfast 12 meters away. What is it that makes the African wild dog one of the most compelling animals on the continent? Ask this question to anyone who has watched them properly, who has sat with them for more than a few minutes, and you will get the same answer in different words. It is how they look after each other. This is what people always come back to: the feeding of the sick, the care of the pups, the way the pack moves as if it is one organism with 14 bodies. In a landscape defined by competition, by the relentless pressure of survival, the wild dog has found another way: cooperation, absolute and unconditional. There are mornings when you are sitting in a vehicle in the early light, and the dogs are resting between hunts, lying in the grass with their improbable ears folded back, their bodies draped over each other with the easy familiarity of animals that have never known loneliness. And in those moments, the question of why we find them so affecting has an obvious answer. They have solved something that we are still working on. They have figured out that the group is more likely to survive than the individual, and they have organized every aspect of their lives around that understanding, and it shows in their hunt success rate, in their pup survival rate, in the way they greet each other every morning and every evening with that ecstatic reunion ritual, the whining and the touching and the excited spinning that looks to human eyes astonishingly like joy. 6,500. That is the number that sits behind every wild dog sighting. Every painted flank in the long grass, every set of enormous ears swiveling in the early morning. 6,500 animals distributed across a fractured range, carrying the genetic memory of a species that once ran across most of a continent and now must navigate a world that has shrunk around them. The threats they face are not dramatic. There is no mass slaughter of wild dogs, no organized hunting for trophies or parts. The threats are quieter than that. Roads that cut through territories, leading to vehicle collisions, snares set for bushbuck and zebra that catch dogs instead, domestic dog diseases, canine distemper and rabies that move along the edges where wilderness and settlement meet, habitat fragmentation that isolates populations from each other, reducing genetic diversity, narrowing the gene pool, and the loss of prey. This is perhaps the most fundamental pressure. Wild dogs need large territories because they need large quantities of prey. Where prey is reduced by poaching or by competition with livestock, the dogs cannot sustain themselves. They need room, enormous room, and in a continent where the human population is growing and the demand for land is accelerating, room is precisely what is becoming hardest to find. Conservation organizations working with wild dogs focus on several interconnected strategies: monitoring packs intensively, tracking their movements with GPS collars, understanding territory size and pup survival rates, vaccinating pack members where possible against domestic dog diseases, working with communities along reserve boundaries to reduce snaring and to create tolerance for the dogs, which is not always easy when a pack has taken 3 goats, establishing and maintaining wildlife corridors that allow packs to move between protected areas, to find new territories, to meet and breed with dogs from other populations. The work is slow and the numbers are stubborn, and the species remains among the most endangered carnivores on Earth. But there are places where the work is paying off. Populations that were declining have stabilized. Packs have moved into areas where they had not been seen in decades. Pups that might not have survived without intervention have grown and joined the hunt. Marco has watched wild dogs his entire adult life. He has seen packs grow and packs shrink. He has seen pups that he watched being born running in the hunting formation of a mature adult a year later. He has lost packs to disease, has watched GPS collars go still in locations that told their own story. He has also watched a female with a torn ear, the alpha of a pack of 14, lead her family through a landscape that asks more of them than it used to. He has a particular feeling about wild dogs that he describes, when pressed, as something close to kinship. Not the anthropomorphic claim that they are like humans. They are not like humans. They are wild dogs. They are themselves. But there is something in the structure of what they have built together, this absolute solidarity, this refusal to leave the injured behind, this sharing of everything, that speaks to something Marco finds harder to articulate but feels clearly nonetheless. They choose each other, every day, in every hunt and every feeding and every morning greeting ceremony. They choose the pack. They choose to stay together, and to function together, and to survive together. In the African bush, where survival is never guaranteed, and every morning is its own negotiation, with a landscape that is indifferent to your needs, this choice is not small. It is everything. Marco returned to camp that morning. He filed a vehicle maintenance report. He drank 2 cups of coffee in the guide's room. He sat with Lasidi, and they talked through the incident in the quiet, methodical way that experienced people talk through things that were close calls without becoming dramatic about them. Lasidi asked if Marco wanted the afternoon off. Marco said no. He said he had a group for the afternoon drive and they were going to look for the dog pack again. He wanted to see where they went after the kill. He wanted to see how long they rested. He wanted to watch the young male with the gold patch above his eye. He was in the vehicle and moving by 3:30. This is what the bush does to the people it chooses, or perhaps what it does to the people who choose it. It makes the fear smaller than the fascination. Not absent, never absent. The fear is important. The fear is what keeps you thinking clearly when your back is against a termite mound, and 14 wild dogs are 12 meters away. But it does not grow larger than the thing that put you there in the first place. The thing that had Marco Ferreira up before 5 in the morning, every morning, in a landscape that is not always kind, watching. Just watching. The dogs were located by radio telemetry at 4:15. The pack was resting in a patch of shade in the lee of